For the last 4 months and 6,000 kilometers, I've been driving this Cupra Formentor every day. Now you might be interested in Cupra if you're looking for a sporty family SUV, which this VZX grade certainly is. It's got 228 kilowatts of power and all-wheel drive, but interestingly, it only costs $67,000 drive away with 3 years of free servicing, and that's much cheaper than something like a Volkswagen Tiguan R. So, should you buy a Cupra Formentor? Well, in today's video, I'm going to tell you the 5 things that I've loved about the Cupra Formentor in my time with the car, and the 5 things that I haven't liked so much and that I think Cupra should work on for this car's facelift. At the end of the video, I'll tell you whether I recommend you should buy a Formentor or not. But first of all, I'll tell you what spec I ordered the car in and what options are fitted to this particular vehicle. Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. When it came time to choose what sort of Formentor I was going to run for this long-term review, I went for the VZX. It is the top of the range, but it actually looks like some of the best value for money. It's only about 11 grand more than a base model Formentor, but it's got nearly 100 kilowatts more power and a whole bunch of standard kit inside, like leather seats, which you have to option on other blends of Formentor. There is also a plug-in hybrid though, and I'm going to talk more about that later because that's the alternative that I would also consider for this car. Now, my Formentor here, it's in petrol blue matte for the paint. First matte colored car I've ever run for an extended period of time. That's held up pretty well, and that was $2,300. It's also got Brembo brakes for $4,150. That requires going to a tire repair kit, which is a bit of a bummer. And to be honest, I don't think that many people are going to stress the brakes out that much on this car, so I'd probably avoid those and keep the spec a little bit cheaper if I was doing it again. Now on the VZX, petrol blue leather is the only color you can get inside, and those copper wheels, they come standard too. First really enjoyable thing about the Formentor VZX is the performance. There's stacks of it on tap. This is a powerful car, 228 kilowatts available, and 400 Newton meters of torque, channeled to all 4 wheels via a 7-speed wet clutch DSG transmission. So all of these oily bits are borrowed from a tried and tested Volkswagen Group parts bin. None of this is new, not the EA888 engine, not the wet DSG, not the all-wheel drive system, which is a relatively recent generation Holdex unit. It's all been around for ages, and yet it all works great here. It kind of proves you don't necessarily need the newest mechanicals in order to make the car feel good out on the road, and that's just the way the Formentor VZX is. Over time, the performance of the VZX becomes pretty addictive because there's such a wave of torque on tap in this car that you just surge into gaps. Overtaking is an absolute doddle, and off-the-line performance is superb because there's excellent traction from the all-wheel drive system that hooks up really, really well. We performance tested this car independently. I'll put the results on the screen now, but I was able to easily get 0 to 100 times out of this car sub 5 seconds without really even trying. And the Brembo brakes also put up excellent stops too, though Cupras that we've tested without Brembos have also stopped in a very powerful way as well. But while the straight line performance is really impressive, it's actually the usable performance on offer in the Formentor that's even better, and that's because of the magical chassis in this car. The ride and handling both conspire to allow you to set an awesome pace on a country road in this vehicle, and this is Cupra's best car in my view. The Leon is tremendous fun to drive, but the Formentor maintains 98% of that car's chassis with much more usable space inside and a much higher degree of plushness from the suspension, which uses the Volkswagen Group's latest generation adaptive dampers to really awesome effect. The adaptive dampers in this car manage to maintain a nice compliant ride that's really only upset by the worst of bumps that Australian B roads throw up. In town, the ride quality is firm and you will notice the bumps and potholes, but it's not too bad given the large alloy wheels and relatively low profile tyres. But on a country road, the Formentor VZX really shines with just tremendous ride and handling characteristics that make you want to keep pushing it harder and harder. So that performance, which is so good in a testing environment, is genuinely usable out in the real world too. And there's lovely, quick steering that communicates what's happening at the front end, and decent grip, but not an overwhelming amount, so the Formentor still lets you have fun, which is important. And then there's the price of the Formentor VZX, which is really fair in my opinion, perhaps more than fair. And that makes sense because Cupra Australia needs to get runs on the board. Australia is the first major export market for this Barcelona brand, so they need to do well. And as a result, they've certainly priced the cars attractively, particularly the Formentor VZX, which is big performance, 228 kilowatts, all-wheel drive. This thing will run close to 4 seconds 0 to 100s all day long. And it only costs $66,990 drive away. Compare that to a Tiguan R, which does have 7 more kilowatts and a tricky diff at the rear end. That car costs about $8,000 more than this vehicle drive away. In fact, you can get into a Formentor VZX for about the same as Volkswagen's smaller T-Roc R, which definitely doesn't feel as plush as this vehicle. So in terms of value, it's pretty good. And then you look at stuff like the ownership costs. 3 years of servicing are included for free. You can top that up for a little bit more if you want 5 years of servicing. There's a 5-year warranty on the Formentor as well. It only starts to go a little bit downhill when you come to fuel consumption in the VZX, and that's a point that I'll come back to in just a minute. Another big positive of the Formentor is a fairly subjective one, and that's that the styling and the design are really lovely. It's bold, it's a lot less conservative than a Volkswagen or a Skoda, despite using effectively the same toolkit as those cars. And while some of those bold choices made by Cupra, including the extensive use of petrol blue and copper, particularly on the VZX grade, won't be to everybody's tastes, if you do like that color combination, which is a naturally pleasing one to look at in contrast, then I think you'll enjoy the way this car looks. And much of that sort of panache extends to the interior as well. While I have my reservations about some of the materials used, it's a very presentable cabin. And I found that when I've been driving people around in this car over the last few months, they think it looks genuinely expensive outside, and they're really impressed by the layout and the look and the design of the interior as well. So particularly compared to something really quite conservative like a Tiguan, the Formentor lets you really stand out, and personally I quite like that. One thing I've loved about the Formentor, but won't suit everybody, is the size of the car. The fact that it's relatively restrained in length at 4450 millimeters, but quite wide and quite low, gives it awesome proportions outside. This is a beautiful looking medium SUV with a really long bonnet, very unique for a Volkswagen Group MQB vehicle, which have transverse engines. And you can see the packaging is decent. Here in the back row at 6 foot, I've got excellent headroom, and legroom and tow room are actually okay behind my own driving position. But if your parents are really tall teenagers, your kids have got heaps of stuff, or you're looking to have 3 people across in the back row, I think you're going to find the Formentor a little small, and you're going to want to look at perhaps a cousin vehicle like the Volkswagen Tiguan 162 TSI or R, or the Skoda Kodiaq RS, both of which are quite a bit more practical than this car, but perhaps not quite as chic in design. So the size works for me, it may or may not work for you. You do pay for all of that performance in the VZX somewhere, and that place is fuel consumption. The Formentor requires premium octane petrol, so that's where the higher costs start, although that's the case for virtually any European SUV these days. It's just not a particularly frugal car. On my commute in suburban Sydney, which is about 20 kilometers in distance per day, I was only ever able to get about 10 litres per 100 Ks, which isn't the worst, but we've seen a lot better out of other Volkswagen Group cars in the past. And indeed, our long-term fuel consumption in the car, which did bias highway driving in fact, is only 8.8 litres per 100 kilometers. So, you know, it's not frugal, but Cupra does offer you an alternative, which is the Formentor VZE plug-in hybrid. Even when that car's battery is flat, it'll still give you 7 litres per 100 Ks, which is decent enough. And when you charge the battery, we've tested it to offer about 45 kilometers of electric range in the real world, which is quite impressive. The next downside to the Formentor is a tempered one, and that's the relatively small size of its boot. Now, it's hard to ping the Cupra for this because it's actually not a very big car. At 4450 mils long, it's only just mid-size. It's kind of medium, as Deputy Editor Kurt Dupre would say, and so it's hard to criticize this, but at 420 litres, it does have a smaller boot than the Mazda CX-5. Cupra doesn't currently have a true mid-size or large SUV. It's got the Ateca, which is taller and boxier, but actually shorter than this car, It'll only be in a few years' time when Cupra is ready to launch the Terramar, which is a bigger crossover that will suit families a little bit better than this car. One surprising downside in the Formentor has been the interior materials, which are a huge mixed bag. Some of them are lovely, like the leather seats and this gorgeous steering wheel in navy blue with copper detailing all over it. That's great, and the dash pad is really awesome too. But the secondary materials really tend to skimp in this car. We've got really scratchy plastics down here where your leg rests and hard plastic door tops in the back seat as well. Now, normally you can live with that, but I've found that they actually mark and scratch quite easily in the Formentor, which is unusual for a Volkswagen Group product. And compared to cousin brand Skoda, Cupra just doesn't feel all that premium inside, and perhaps that's okay. But we should really just be thinking about Cupra as mainstream with additional sportiness rather than something like a cut price Audi competitor, which it is not. Much of the Formentor's tech stack is actually pretty impressive, including the virtual cockpit and the Beats stereo, which has a good acoustic. But there are improvements that can be made to this central screen. It's big at 12 inches, definitely nice and large and plenty of real estate. But the resolution that Cupra has gone for with the panel used by the screen is pretty disappointing. Cupra's own software looks remarkably fuzzy and not particularly high res, and that's especially the case when you look at Apple CarPlay. It should have plenty of real estate. We should be getting high res CarPlay, but we're not. Instead, it's cartoonishly large, a little laggy, but as you can see, we just have like no ability to really place lots of apps side by side here, which you do have in cars like the Skoda Octavia, which have a smaller screen but a higher resolution and higher quality panel behind it. Then there's the climate control. I know everyone likes to complain about this, but the fact you need multiple taps to do things like change the fan speed or synchronize the temperatures probably just is one tap too many. Some physical controls wouldn't go astray for that stuff. The Formentor VZX might be pretty affordable at $66,990 drive away for all of that performance that you get. But don't go thinking it's a luxury car in here or even completely competitive with high-spec Tiguan's. For instance, you don't get the same seat on the passenger side as you do on the driver's side. As you can see, you're pumping this seat manually. No big deal, and we do have height adjustment. But if you regularly swap between driver and front passenger on road trips, for instance, you'll really be missing that electric memory passenger seat that you do get on cars like the Tiguan 162 TSI. In terms of other specification, it's reasonably generous, but you will be paying more for features like a panoramic sunroof, which some rivals give you for free at this price. So finally, should you buy a Cupra Formentor? Well, after my time with the car, I think you should if you don't need a huge amount of outright space. The Cupra Formentor could suit parents with smaller children, empty nesters whose kids have left the house, or people who don't have kids and maybe are just going to put a couple of dogs in the back. If you've got really tall teenagers or your brood has a huge amount of stuff that you need to take with you, then you'll probably want to wait for Cupra to introduce a bigger SUV. But for a lot of buyers, the Formentor's chic design, superb chassis, fair pricing, cheap running costs, and X factor that comes with this new brand will all be very appealing. For me, I think the bigger question isn't whether this car is worth recommending, which it definitely is. The bigger question is whether you should go for the VZX, which is the spec I've been driving, or the VZE plug-in hybrid. It's difficult to get your hands on the hybrid, but they're incredibly frugal and they drive just about as well as this car. The VZX uses a lot more fuel, but it's got heaps of grunt, it makes a good sound, and well, it's the only Formentor to get the extended copper detailing and quad pipes, and that's cool. Of course, your priorities are your own thing, and I'm keen to hear your view down below this video, so please leave me a comment. While you're down there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell to see more of our long-term reviews at Chasing Cars, and as always, thank you for watching.